Tonight, I have 3 stories for you. 3 accounts sent in by people who had never spoken to each other, lived in different states, and described completely different nights. But there was one detail I couldn't stop thinking about after I read them. In every story, the worst part wasn't what happened in the moment. It was what came after. The part that stayed. The part that made them realize it hadn't ended when they thought it had. Listen closely, because by the end of the 3rd story, one small detail from the first 2 starts to feel a lot less random. My name is Aaron. I've been camping most of my life. Solo trips, backcountry trails, long hikes where you go hours without seeing another person. I'm not reckless, and I'm not new to being alone in the woods. I know what normal sounds like out there. I know what a deer sounds like. I know what a bear sounds like. I know what it sounds like when something big is moving through wet brush. What I heard in Olympic National Park last October didn't sound like any of that. And the reason I'm sending this in now is because it didn't stay in the woods. Whatever was outside my tent that night showed up at my apartment 3 days later. I wish that was an exaggeration. It isn't. This happened on October 14th in the Hoh Rainforest section of Olympic National Park. If you've never seen that area, it's hard to explain how wrong it feels after dark. The trees are massive. Everything is soaked. Moss covers the ground, the trunks, the fallen logs. Even in daylight, it feels dim. At night, it feels buried. I was camping alone about 2 miles off the main trail, where I had all the gear I was supposed to have. Satellite communicator, food secured, tent set up right. Nothing unusual. The first night was completely normal. Cold, quiet, uneventful. I remember hearing an elk somewhere in the distance around 2 in the morning. I even caught its eyes in my headlamp when I stepped out for a minute. The second night was different immediately. Not because I saw anything, because the forest sounded wrong. The best way I can explain it is this. It wasn't silent. There were still sounds, dripping water, wind moving through branches, but it felt like everything alive had pulled back. Like the woods were making room for something. I got into my sleeping bag a little after 10 and tried to ignore it. That lasted maybe 20 minutes. I heard footsteps outside my tent, slow ones, not the scattered movement of an animal, not 4 legs, not something sniffing around for food. These were measured, evenly spaced footsteps, moving in a circle around the tent. One pass, then another, then a third. I stayed completely still and counted each step in my head because I was trying to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. But the more I listened, the worse it got. It wasn't just circling. It was circling at the exact same distance each time, like it was keeping itself just outside the wall of the tent. Then it stopped, right in front of the tent door. I could hear breathing. I don't mean some loud, growling animal sound. It was quieter than that, controlled. Close enough that I knew if I reached forward and unzipped the flap, whatever it was would be right there. Well, I lay there for what felt like an hour. It was probably 45 minutes. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Finally, I grabbed my headlamp, turned it on, and unzipped the tent. Nothing. No movement. No sound. No shape disappearing into the trees. But the ground outside my tent was covered in wet moss. And in that moss were prints. Footprints. Human-shaped. Bare feet. Clear enough that I could see the shape of toes. It was 38 degrees that night. I broke camp before sunrise. I didn't wait for daylight. I packed everything with shaking hands, shoved what I could into my bag, and started hiking out around 4 in the morning. I kept telling myself it had to be a person, some idiot out there messing with people. That was the only explanation that made sense. But the part that kept bothering me wasn't the prints, it was the pattern. The way the footsteps moved around the tent, then stopped at the door. I kept hearing that pattern in my head the entire drive back to Seattle. 3 days later, I woke up at 3:17 in the morning to a sound outside my bedroom window. Breathing. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I was wide awake instantly. I remember checking my phone because I wanted to prove to myself later that I hadn't dreamed it. 3:17 a.m. The breathing went on for maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then it stopped. I grabbed my phone and just listened in the dark. Then I heard movement, not on the window, not scraping on the wall. Footsteps, slow footsteps moving away from the side of the building. And for some reason, without even meaning to, I started counting them. They moved left, then right, then stopped. The same pattern, the exact same pattern I heard outside my tent. I called the police. They came out, checked the building, looked for a ladder, checked the fire escape, checked the ground below the window. Nothing. No marks. No sign anyone had been there. They were polite, but I could tell what they were thinking. What I didn't tell them right away was that my building had a security camera outside my apartment door. At 3:14 a.m., 3 minutes before I woke up, the hallway motion light came on by itself. The camera showed an empty hall for about 2 seconds. Then a shadow moved across the far edge of the frame. Not a full person, not enough to identify anything. Just the edge of something tall passing by the camera from right to left. I moved out 2 weeks later. I've never gone back to Olympic National Park. I don't camp alone anymore, and I still think about one part of it more than anything else. Whatever was outside that tent didn't rush me. It didn't force its way in. It didn't try to hurt me. It let me leave. Then it found out where I lived, and sometimes that feels worse. The next story didn't happen in the woods. It happened in a house in Columbus, Ohio. No trail, no campsite, no isolation, just one woman home alone, and a phone call that should have been impossible. Sarah was 27 and living alone in Columbus, Ohio. Her boyfriend was out of state visiting family in Michigan, and she had the week off from work. It was supposed to be quiet, boring, if anything. At 11:43 on a Wednesday night, her phone started ringing. Not a text, not a spam alert, an incoming call. She looked down and saw her own contact photo, her own name, her own number. She let it ring 4 times because she honestly thought her phone had glitched. Then she answered. What she heard on the other end is the reason she moved out of that house 3 days later. At first, there was nothing, just dead air. Then she heard her own voice say, "Sarah, don't go to the basement." The call disconnected. Sarah told me she knew how ridiculous that sounds, and if she had heard the story from somebody else, she probably wouldn't believe it either. She knew caller ID could be spoofed. She knew audio could be edited. She knew all of that. But she said the part that broke her immediately was how specific the voice sounded. Not just like her voice, the exact way she says her own name, the same little rise at the end of the first syllable that her mom used to tease her about, the same breathiness in the middle of the sentence. It sounded like her, if her voice had been recorded, standing half an inch from her ear. She called 911. The dispatcher later described her as strangely calm. Not relaxed, not normal. Just calm in a way that made it sound like she was already bracing for something. Officer Diaz arrived about 8 minutes later. He checked the house, every room, closets, garage, windows, back door. Then he opened the basement door. Sarah said she heard his footsteps going down the stairs, then nothing for a while. He was down there 11 minutes. When he came back up, she said his face looked wrong. That was the word she kept using, wrong. Like he'd seen something he was actively trying not to show on his face. He told her the basement was clear. He left. Sarah locked the door and stayed on the couch with every light in the house on. She thought about leaving. She thought about driving to a friend's place. But once midnight passed, she felt stupid enough about what had already happened that she decided to just stay awake until morning. At around 2 a.m., she heard movement under the floor. Not footsteps, dragging. something heavy shifting below the basement ceiling, slow enough that she could track it from one side of the house to the other. She called Officer Diaz directly. He'd left his card on the counter. It rang 7 times. He called back 4 minutes later. Sarah said the first thing he asked wasn't, "What's going on?" It was, "Did you go down there?" He came back with another officer. This time, they stayed in the basement for 22 minutes. When they came upstairs, Officer Diaz was holding a small cassette voice recorder. Old plastic body, physical buttons, something that looked like it had been sitting in a drawer since the late 90s. He set it on the kitchen counter and asked if she'd ever seen it before. She hadn't. He pressed play, and Sarah heard a conversation she had with her mother 6 years earlier, before her mother died. It wasn't a similar conversation. It wasn't something close. It was exact. Every pause, every word, every tiny thing her mother said to calm her down during an argument they had in the car one night. A private conversation no one else was there for. One that had never been recorded. Sarah started crying before the tape was even halfway through. The recorder itself was old. According to the follow-up she got later, the cassette had been manufactured in the late 80s. But no one could explain when the audio had actually been made, or how that conversation ended up on it. The official conclusion was simple: no evidence of criminal activity. Sarah moved to Michigan 3 days later and never spent another night in that house. Officer Diaz filed for early retirement 6 months after the incident. Sarah tried to contact him once through a mutual connection. He never responded, but the detail she told me to include, the one she said matters more than anything else, is the wording. The voice on the phone didn't say, "There's someone in the basement." It didn't say, "Call the police." It said, "Don't go to the basement." Not a threat, a warning. And that's the part she still can't live with. Because if something in that house wanted to hurt her, then something else called first and tried to keep her away from it. She doesn't know which one scares her more. Honestly, neither do I. The last story came from a retired park ranger. He spent 22 years working search and recovery in Washington state. He told me most missing person cases end one of 2 ways. This one didn't. The man who sent this in asked me not to use his full name, so I'll call him Marcus. He retired after 22 years, working in and around Washington forests. Search missions, recoveries, missing hikers, lost campers, weather exposure, falls. The kinds of situations that usually have an explanation, even when they're tragic. He told me he'd seen enough over the years to know that the woods can do strange things to people. But in November of 2019, his team found something that still doesn't sit right with him, not because of what they found, because of what they didn't. The missing hiker was a 34-year-old man named Daniel. Marcus asked me not to include the last name because the family still doesn't speak publicly about the case. Daniel had gone out on a 5-day solo trek. When he didn't come home, his wife reported him missing. Search teams were sent out. Marcus joined on day 7. They found the tent on day 9. It was more than 4 miles off any marked trail, in an area Daniel wasn't supposed to be in. His permit had him registered for a completely different route, roughly 11 miles north of where they found his campsite. The tent itself looked almost normal. Set up correctly, sleeping bag inside, stove still there, food still there. His boots were placed neatly outside the entrance, side by side, and on top of the sleeping bag was a small, leather-bound journal. Marcus said the first thing that truly bothered him wasn't the journal. It was the zipper. The tent had been zipped shut from the inside. The journal had 12 entries. The first 8 were completely ordinary: trail notes, weather, distances, and wildlife observations. The kind of things experienced hikers write down so they can track where they've been. Entry 9 was different. Something has been following me for 2 days. I've changed direction 4 times. It changes direction too. It's not curious. It's patient. There's a difference. Entry 10. I can't find the trail. My compass works. I don't. I've walked in a straight line for hours, and I keep coming back to the same place. Entry 11. I think it wants me to stay. I think that's what this is. Marcus said that's when the mood around the team changed. Up to that point, it still felt like a missing person case. Confusion, exposure, disorientation. After that, it felt like they had walked into the middle of something already in progress. He told me he stopped reading before the last entry and had the journal photographed and bagged. When I asked why he stopped there, he went quiet for a while. Then he said the last entry wasn't written in pen. It wasn't pencil either. It didn't match anything found in Daniel's pack. The lab later identified it only as organic material. Marcus told me the report used a more specific word than that. He said he still wishes he hadn't read it. I asked him what entry 12 said. He said he had only read it once, and that once was enough. Then he told me. I understand now. It was never following me. I was following it. It's been here longer than the trees. It doesn't hunt. It collects. And when I came back to this tree for the 7th time, I understood. I'm not lost. I'm kept. Then, if someone finds this, I don't read it at night. Don't read it alone, because reading it means you're already in the wrong place. And then the last lines. I'm not afraid anymore. That's the worst part. I should be. But it's so quiet here, and I'm so tired, and it's been so long since I heard anything except, that was it. The sentence ended in the middle of the page, not at the bottom. Not like he ran out of space, like the writing stopped all at once. Daniel was never found. The case is still open. Marcus retired in 2021, but he told me he still dreams about that clearing. In the dream, he can hear someone writing, not talking, not walking. Just the dry scratching sound of something moving across paper, over and over in the dark. He said the journal is still in evidence storage, and I asked whether anyone had ever tried to request it through records. He smiled when I asked that. Then he said, people have tried. The request never seems to go through. I asked him what he thought that meant. He took a while to answer. Then he said, I think some things don't want to be found because they were never lost in the first place. I didn't have anything to say after that. So I'll leave you with the same thing he left me with. If you ever get turned around in the woods and you start seeing the same place over and over, go home before it starts to feel familiar.